I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. How do we make sense of the current revolution happening in the functional medicine and integrative health space around people now being able to move forward with their lab data and new pathways to using the data to be as healthy and vital as they can possibly be? Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by a functional diagnostic nutritionist, Evan Transue. Evan, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, I appreciate being on here. I will say from the get-go, I'm not a doctor myself, but I have some good information. So it feels, seriously though, it is a privilege to be able to come on a podcast for someone like you, and you still being objective enough to think that people like myself do have a voice in this and something good to share. So I think we need more people like you, and I appreciate being here.
Well, thanks for the positive feedback. As we got ready for today, and as I've been thinking about today's session, I think it's a really important new part of the Field Notes podcast library for people to get a chance to hear from someone with your expertise and your personal health narrative arc, which we'll get to talk about all the good things that have happened to your health. This sort of old versus new paradigm. I think there were problems with really the easiest way to describe it is I'm 58. And so when I would go to my small town doctor in Western Montana growing up, they would say, I'm the doctor, I have spoken. You do or don't need an imaging test, you do or don't need blood work. And it would have never have occurred to me or my family to say, oh, I'm going to find out what my BUN or creatinine is, or my cholesterol, or what have you. And fast forward now, there's a myriad number of different paths and dots people can connect to be optimally healthy. And of course, there's just a disenchantment with conventional medicine that it's great at diagnosing brain tumors and getting people surgery and killing pneumonia with antibiotics. But in terms of sorting out the complex chronic backstory, it's no surprise that people need access to objective data via other means. Is that, do you feel that's an accurate way to land on this?
Yeah, and I wish, because I say this on every podcast, not just when I'm with an MD. I wish people in our space would not develop almost this disgust and hatred with Western medicine, because they act like people sometimes are going into this to go screw people. I'm like, that's insane. I'm sure there's bad apples and psychopathic people in medicine, just like there are probably some in functional medicine taking advantage of people right now. But that's a very small minority of individuals. Most get into both these spaces to help. And even more importantly, Western medicine is not inherently flawed. In fact, if we didn't have Western medicine, I don't think we would have gotten far enough to complain about some of the chronic issues that I have dealt with. So this is coming from someone who's dealt with it. And what I mean by that is one stat I always reference is that in the early 1800s in America, if you had a kid, there was a 1 in 2 chance that kid's not making it past age 4 or 5. 1 in 2, that was just 200 years ago. And so that wasn't, my functional lab tests and supplements and sleeping well that fixed that. That was amazing strides in medicine that was allowing these people to stay alive. And who knows, I might have been one of those 1 and 2 that didn't make it, given my genetics, if we did not invent the things that we've invented. So the problem has become is we had this amazing hammer and we're treating everything like a nail, but really there is this, I think, a really distinct separation between some of the life-threatening and emergency level things that come up and Western medicine is amazing at, versus what you said, this chronic issue, or these chronic issues rather, that someone might have for 8, 9, 10 years, even decades, and they've never really been in a life-threatening spot. They just feel like crap the entire time that they're dealing with it.
Yeah, that feels extremely accurate to me. And as you just invoked, I've spent my whole career saying it's not a dichotomy. It's not this or that. It's this and that. And I also think it even kind of fits into this narrative around health and sort of compassionate, respectful acceptance of all of life's complexity. It's a little more challenging to pull it all together, but it's a heck of a lot more satisfying. It's more sort of accurate and fair. And nonetheless, though, folks, somebody with ulcerative colitis, they're just so disenchanted when they're advised they're going to, their inflammatory bowel disease is going to wed them to a drug, and it's treated like it came out of nowhere and there's nothing to do other than take medication. So no wonder they're talking to you and me and saying, come on, where's the fruits and vegetables, the positive attitude, the gut testing, the restoration of gut barrier integrity?
Yeah.
That's why they dig it. All right. And so I like the way we're going to put this together today, in that we're going to start then with just talking about how lab testing can be used to find healing opportunities.
Sure. So for myself, I didn't set out at 5 years old and say, I can't wait to be a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I don't even think that was a thing when I would have been 5 years old, and no kid has ever aspired to that. What happened is I started dealing with health symptoms at 5 years old, right? Got progressively sicker and sicker. And I'm fast forwarding through the story to share how lab testing, specifically what we would call functional lab testing, is relevant. By the time I got to 18, I had 7 different diagnosed conditions, some physical, some mental. I would put them very similarly, like in the same category, but people do separate those things. And so after the 7th condition, that was when, even at 18, even without any college experience, not being the smartest person in the world by any means, you start to wonder, okay, how many of these can we possibly stack on before we get to a place where we say this is just ridiculous? And I also started to reflect and say, well, I've been getting worse the entire time I've been alive. If this is 18, what does 78 look like? What does 82 look like? Do I make it that far? And it became very depressing. And I say depressing almost in a practical way, because there's literal major depressive disorder that could be just purely biochemical, and you might not know why you feel that way. I knew why I was depressed at that point, and it's because I didn't see a hope for my future, or see how I could participate in jobs or go do some higher education. So that's when I started really getting curious about this. And I would go to the family doctors. So they're good at like labeling clusters of symptoms, right? They would say, well, you have this fear of impending doom. It only lasts for 20 minutes. It happens a few times per day. Okay, you have panic disorder, but there's no blood test that's being ran for a panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, or even some of the other conditions that I had. So when we run the normal blood panels, the only thing, even though I had these conditions, the only thing that would show up on my blood panel at the time is my TSH was like a 3.5, which to them is, I mean, even in functional medicine, you wanted a little bit better, but it's not the end of the world. To them, it certainly wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't even out of range. And my cholesterol was mildly high. That is the only thing that they could find from the standard blood work that is ran, despite me having all these conditions. And so what occurs is you get some medications for those conditions, obviously, to help you feel better, hopefully. But then once that standard blood work has kind of been ruled out, it's not conclusive of anything, there's really not much more that was offered to me. I'm not saying every medical practice ever is like that. I'm saying that's how I experienced this in a place that, if you want to talk about privilege, honestly, I lived like upper middle class. I had a pretty damn good life. So you would think we're getting the best care, but it was more, yeah, these are just things that you have. So then I start getting, again, curious, and it started with reading books. It started with the internet, like just looking up anything I could find, until a few years later, I meet a woman named Jen Maleka. Now, Jen Maleka, I love her to death because she worked with my mom, and she's been an FDN for over 10 years now. She was one of the first FDNs. And so I'm talking to her on the phone because I just met her at a health talk that she was given in person. And I talked to her on the phone, and I remember her laughing in like a happy way on the phone, because she was asking me what I was looking for in a program or just a provider if I was going to work with her as a practitioner. And I said, I feel like I'm in a cycle of trial and error type of thing. I'm trying this supplement. I'm trying this diet. I did vegan, paleo, whatever. And I do move the needle. I move the needle enough that I'm still convinced after 3-4 years that this is a worthy space to be pursuing and spending time in. But I'm all over the place. Like some days I feel like I'm 70% better. Other days I'm 20% better. I need something objective that is not the standard blood tests that can tell me what's wrong. And that's when she chuckled on the phone. And it was a kind of interesting moment because I'd never had someone respond that way. But even 8 years later, I still remember it. And now I get why she was laughing, because what FDN is, are a system of labs that the founder, Reed Davis, developed after working with the actual numbers over 11,000 people before he taught this as a course to others. And he kind of discovered 6 main areas that he likes to test for in chronically ill individuals, but it can also be used for those looking to optimize. And the acronym for that is hidden stressors, you can call them. So hormonal, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, and nervous system. So he tests in those areas. Now, some of these tests, people got to remember that some of this wouldn't be covered by insurance because they don't look at it as diagnostic. Some of this would be considered downright quackery by places, despite evidence of certain markers being very relevant. Nonetheless, it worked for me. So if it's nothing but anecdotal, it sure worked for me because when we looked at these tests, my hormones were a wreck. I was only 21 years old when I ran the test, and they're explaining to me that I'm in this, what they called an exhaustive phase of HPA axis dysfunction. No one ever told me that. I felt that way once they described it, but no one told me that. We ran a GI map, which was not always used by Reed, to be clear, but the GI map is kind of like our updated version. At least we think it's one of the better ones right now for stool testing for what our philosophy teaches. And I find a parasite, Blastocystis hominis. I had H. pylori with virulence factors. My secretory IgA, which, kind of a first line immune defense marker, was super low, which really can't happen unless it was also super high for a while, showing that your body, again, was under chronic stress. I had been on 20 courses, probably more than 20. I just always use that number. 20 courses of antibiotics in my life up until that point. And my, of course, gut microbiome was just destroyed. Like all the beneficial bacteria were super low. Those 2 tests alone gave me amazing insight. And I don't want to keep rattling stuff off here necessarily, but another one that was big for me, and I recommend everyone try to figure this out if you're someone dealing with chronic illness, not because it's the only thing, but because for some people it's such a big thing. And for my mom and I, it was, we did food sensitivity tests that were not looking at allergy responses. So those are IgE for those listening that don't know. That's an allergy, but a food sensitivity can almost be labeled as any immune response that's not IgE. And so we ran this test called the MRT, the Mediator Release Test by Oxford Biomedical Labs. And sure enough, I had a sensitivity to gluten. Sure enough, my mom did as well. And so I was eating well, or what I thought was well for a 21-year-old, but some of that eating well was organic Ezekiel bread that, of course, has wheat. And just like I was getting exposed all the time. So that's like the higher level overview of stuff. It was just amazing that these people could show me every single marker, almost in every lab that they ran, probably like 90% if I'm being accurate, I don't want to exaggerate, had something out of range and thus something to work on. But when I went to conventional care, again, it was mildly high cholesterol, stop eating as much fat, which I didn't think I was eating a lot of fat at 21, that's for sure. And, your TSH, I'll maybe watch it one day, but for right now, it's all good. And that wasn't, someone dismissing me either. That's why I try to balance this and let people know that wasn't someone dismissing me. That's the tools that they were given for these problems. That's the hammer. So I needed someone with, a saw and all these different things to help me out. So it actually wasn't scary when I got these results back. Believe it or not, I almost like rejoiced in it because someone could finally tell me, oh, I need to go work on these things. And that's when my progress, remember I told you it went from like 70% to 20%, depending on the day or week. This is when we started making steady progress that stayed in the right direction. So healing takes a while, in my opinion, for most of us, but damn, it's nice to see it just go up. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but
this is great. Yeah. What a great guest. And this is so cool. I want to do what they call in positive psychology, linger a little longer here, because there's a couple of really cool things to explore. So just in a second, one of the big things I think our audience will be interested in is then how one determines to safely take action based on the data. So we'll talk about that in 1 minute. And the other cool thing I was thinking about asking you, I'm sure it'll pop back in my head. So
I'd love to go there next if you want.
Well, let's drill into this because it's just so, well, there's so many things you said I find really beautiful about how our body's an ecosystem, not a machine, right? And so it makes so much sense if the ecosystem doesn't have free-flowing rivers and vegetation and lots of healthy critters and few invasive species, right? Then the ecosystem's not going to be healthy and you're not going to have the payoff that you want, which is vibrant health bright eyes and rosy skin and good energy and normal
Yes.
mood and all that good stuff. So yeah, let's delve into, you learn these things, you make steady progress, but how did you determine the action items?
I think this is one of the most unique parts about FDN because, of course, people will ask, definitely nowadays, since there's so many courses and things out there, how is this different than other things? And I also want to be clear, I think there's a lot of amazing things out there. This is not, Reed always says this too, this is not a place where we're in competition. He can't list off. If people are getting into this space because of some other company's marketing, good. That's a good thing for all of us. So with that said, though, where we are unique is that he constantly reiterates when you're learning from him, we never treat the paperwork. In fact, you can't do that anyway because you're not at least with your FDN hat on, you're certainly not a doctor, even if you came in as one. So we're not treating the paperwork. We're addressing the person. And so that is where it gets a little nuanced because you could have someone in theory that has identical lab results to me, and we are not necessarily going to be taking the same exact action. We're trained to look a little farther. So what does that mean? It means where is this person at in their life? What are the unique circumstances that have led to here? And where are we at with those? What's the age? All that stuff. So, for example, let's go back to that HPA axis dysfunction I was talking about. This is becoming less and less used, and I don't think it's a proper term, but like adrenal fatigue type of thing for those listening would be similar. So this is not an opinion to say that my body was no longer able to produce the proper amount of cortisol for the stress I was given it on a normal day. That was an objective thing that we could measure and show I cannot produce these stress responses anymore. It was also indicated by the low secretory IgA on the GI map. That's a chronic issue when it's low. It's not an overnight thing. So when we see that, then we need to go a step further and say, okay, well, Evan's 21. That's good because even if he's been sick his whole life, he's going to probably just bounce back faster than someone who is 91. We could all agree on that. Okay, so that's a good thing. But two, what does he have to do in his life right now? Or what did I have to do in my life right now? Am I working a job that's 50 hours a week? And if I quit I'm going to have some real stress then, right? Like, is that going on? Do I have a wife and kids at the time that rely on me and expect me to be, present with them at the end of the day? Oh, no, actually, I didn't have any of those things. I guess it's a blessing. I couldn't really maintain any good job. So my parents were very nice and let me work for them as I could because they had things that I could do for them. And then on top of it, I did not have a wife and kids at 21. I was not in the best shape to be doing that kind of stuff. So we were able to attack things, if you will, especially on the gut side, a little heavier because we can lower my stress elsewhere. So I was exercising pretty intensely still about 5 days a week at the time. And when I say intensely, I mean, the YMCA had pickup basketball. It was the same like 10 guys that played all the time. So we were running for 2 hours straight, basically 3 days a week. And then I would lift a couple days a week. My mentor, this was so counterintuitive to me. I could not believe that this was the recommendation. The mentor that I had in FDN, because we assign people one-on-one mentors, said to me, just so you know, that I want you to be clear, this is not don't exercise forever, but based on your results, if you want to turn up this healing, I'm going to say skip the basketball. I'm going to even say keep the weightlifting light for right now, just for now. What I do want you to do, though, because you need to move your body, is you can go walk. You can walk to the point that you don't feel like doing it anymore, but that's what we're going to do every day. And this is what I'm about to share is the only part of my story that I normally don't share. It's not that it's not still uncomfortable with a dude, but mostly I talk to women in this space, and I know it's mostly women listeners, so hopefully they find this funny and not insulting. After a week of doing that, let's just say, as a 21-year-old guy who never really understood why my friends were such animals and in the pursuit of women all the time, I realized, oh, I do have that. I've just been sick my whole life. So when I say things started changing in a week, I mean, it was that dramatic that I thought I was not a person who had a normal libido for my whole life. And I thought that was me. And I'm like, no, that's my health. My health is so bad that it's not prioritizing one of the, let's be honest, main biological reasons that we're here on this earth. So it was these incredible things. And so that what we're doing there is treating the person, addressing the person. We're saying you're able to really lower your stress right now. Let's do that. And then we can go a little heavier on some of the supplements, just in the temporary supplements, that is, to address some of the gut stuff. Whereas let's take, Evan now. okay, I'm a work nut and I do love working. So I'm going like 50, 60 hours a week between FDN and other stuff that I do. That's by choice. But if I was sick again and I just did separate careers that weren't in the functional medicine space, then we'd have to say, well, damn, are you going to quit that anytime soon? And I'd probably be like, no, I want to do some other stuff. So we might not go in and start recommending some type of heavy parasite protocol when this person has all these things to maintain. We don't have kids, but I have a wife and I'd like to be able to show up for her as a person most days. So, you got to account for that in your schedule. So what we might just do is the steps might end up looking very similar over a very long period of time, but we're going to break it down a bit slower in the beginning. And another brief example would be, since we're including food sensitivity tests and other long intake forms, seeing what this person might react to. Another thing that might be different from person to person in terms of the action based on the labs is you could have two people with parasitic infections, even the same parasite. And what is great for you might not be great for me. I don't have an opinion on this type of testing either way. I don't do it myself, but like that's what the muscle testers are doing, right? They're trying to see what would work for you or what wouldn't. Again, I'm not advocating for or against that per se. I don't do that. But if I can see someone is, highly reactive to garlic on a food sensitivity test, you have those brands like Alamax or whatever. You might not recommend that to someone for a bacterial infection, but the reality is that's a real example. I was sensitive to that, and my naturopath, God bless her, who I worked with before FDN, she never tested those things. So you know what she did? She gave me a super high dose of Alamax because she thought that's what I needed. And I got the most extreme vertigo of my life. I mean, it was like sickening, and it lasted for hours because I had already dosed up. So by the time that stuff was getting killed, plus the extra stress of the reaction from the supplement that I shouldn't have been taking, I felt terrible. So it's not that it was even a bad recommendation. It was just a bad recommendation for Evan. So those are all examples of how we apply action steps to these labs, but also how it might look very different depending on the person whose lab results they are.
Awesome. Yeah, give us a couple examples then, both for people that just want to know more about how this works in 2024 onward, but also people who may be working with you. So how and where do they order the lab from? Then presumably they meet with a functional nutritionist to interpret the labs. How do they get their hands on the supplements? How does the rest of their medical team know what's going on?
Sure. So there's two different sides here, right? There's the consumer side working with an FDN. Maybe you're an accountant and have no interest in functional health, but you do have an interest in getting better via functional health. So that's going to be a little bit of a different experience. If you are an FDN practitioner, we have a few different things. We have one is our medical director program. So that actually allows us to facilitate these lab orders via our doctors all around the world. So I could have clients in Australia. I could have clients in the UK, Canada, and some of the labs might change a little bit, right? But the philosophy never does. And that's why FDN's a way of thinking more than anything, rather than just labs, although that's very cool. Now, if you are a lay person and you're interested in this, is it mostly an American audience?
No, it's really cool, actually. There's a lot of international folks, so it's a mix.
Okay. I'm sorry, I should have asked that first. So with the American side, because this is relevant, most Americans do not understand that in like 46 out of 50 states, I mean, you can go to ultalabtests.com right now and you can order blood work. Now you're going to pay out of pocket for that. And you realize that's not very fun. And there's a reason that insurance does work for certain things. But if you feel like, you kind of been gaslit, or, I mean, gosh, you just want a full thyroid panel because you have a history or family history of Graves' disease or Hashimoto's, and no one will run the damn thyroid panel for you. My mom had Graves' disease for 7 years before having her thyroid removed. I went to the same family practice. I could not get them to run a full thyroid panel. They will only run my TSH. I mean, that's the only place I get a little passionate about Western medicine. That's insulting. My mom was here for 7 years. You couldn't diagnose her. You finally figure it out. You remove her thyroid, and you're telling me I can't even get my antibodies looked at when I'm a little concerned. So that's just, I think we have a right to have access to that. And in 46 or 47 out of 50 states, you do. So you can do stuff like that. There's also these direct-to-consumer things out there now. People don't understand this. Like if you start ordering stool tests online, you can find stuff. And I don't want to seem biased because obviously I'm an FDN, but guys, you got to understand, if you run a lab test and you do not know how to look at that specific test, one, you can scare the heck out of yourself sometimes because you see reds or super highs and you don't even understand what that means or what it doesn't mean. Sometimes these can be transient highs, by the way. Like if you don't know that a certain supplement that you took is artificially raising the number, you might be freaking out. And there was no reason to freak out because a practitioner would have realized on your intake forms, oh, well, I don't think this would scare someone, but hey, you're taking melatonin every night. No wonder your hormone or your melatonin is super high on this hormone test. I doubt that'd be the one to scare someone, but it's the first example that came up. So you can get a lot of this stuff direct to consumer nowadays, but I would just be very wary of, you better know what you're looking for and you better know what's up. I do think a better option is you could use an FDN. There's also a lot of functional practitioners out there. And the biggest thing that I look for is, in an attempt to not to be biased, don't even care about FDN or IFM or IHP or whatever it might be. Find someone that has people that they've worked with that are willing to share their story, via testimonial or whatever, and says that this worked. No one has this perfected yet. FDN does not have this perfected yet. This is a developing space that is really exciting to be a part of and see. But I tell everyone, if we took a random sick person, with the exceptions of like a terminal illness, like certain cancers and stuff, I've really never seen the person that has used our functional labs, used one of our practitioners, and not felt about 60% better in 90 to 120 days. I have seen plenty of people, though, that's all they did. Like, that 120 days goes by, they get 60, 70% better, and now we're stuck there. And we need to do further investigative work. Oh, crap, it turns out you had black mold in your shower, like literally behind the wall. And so you're eating well, you're doing all this stuff, you're going to bed on time, but every time you take your 50-minute shower, because that's what you do to relax, you're inhaling these mold spores. So you also need to be with the person that accepts, hey, this might not be perfect in the beginning. Certainly it shouldn't be 0% unless you're very advanced at this stuff. But what can we do when we hit the plateau? Are there further things? And so for me, I need to humble myself a lot, especially in this space. If someone comes to me with Lyme and I figure that out halfway through, immediate referral. I don't know enough about that. I don't know enough about the co-infections. I have other practitioners that dedicate their life to that because of their experience with Lyme's. It'd be silly of me to not send that to them. Me personally, that is. So yeah, you want to, ideally, I would say, be ordering labs through people like myself or actual doctors. That'd be nice, who know what to order for you. And I mean, of course, outside of just doctors that are locked into Western medicine.
Yeah, it's just so cool what you're sharing. And Reed Davis will be on next month, so actually there will be 2 FDN iterations in the Field Notes podcast, which I think will be a really cool way for folks to delve into it, even to kind of get to meet the Jedi and the Padawan learner from the Star Wars universe, right?
That's actually, that will literally be the exact dynamic that they feel, because Reed can go in on this stuff. He's not a doctor, but he's a sharp guy.
Well, you're clearly pretty good with your lightsaber there, Evan. So they'll be happy with what they get to hear from you today. A couple of the things that you said are so important. I think that it's incumbent upon me to share a couple pieces here. So one is that there's this powerful way to work, and we need somebody trustworthy to help us sort it. Because the number one rule in clinical medicine is do no harm. And basically, if you draw tests on yourself without somebody to help you interpret them, you can harm yourself. You can harm yourself by going into anxiety and getting into predominantly in terms of this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, stress to stress versus rest and digest, rest and restore. You can literally harm yourself by developing circumstantial anxiety and shutdown over finding blastocystis hominis. And let's briefly just talk about that as one of 1,000 things you could find via testing. I'm going to invoke one of my mentors, Dan Kalish, who's both a business leader and a thought leader in interpreting functional medicine labs. He's kind of semi-retired now. I've had the blessing to host him on a couple summits, and he said he was working with kind of a genius in New York and chatting with him in his library. And he was talking about how when people come into the United Nations from somewhere else in the world and they work in New York, organisms they were carrying in their gut that were helping their immune system, essentially functioning like a probiotic where they lived in Nigeria or Costa Rica or what have you, they would suddenly become symptomatic when they hit the stress of being a representative at the UN in New York City. And this same parasite would become an immune disruptor with downstream immunoinflammatory cascades warranting treatment. And so it's one of these organisms that toggles. It's got a yin and yang manifestation. And if you don't know how to put the puzzle together in terms of the data piece and the human being and what to do, you could be terrified by the blastocystis and not know in you whether it's beneficial versus pathogenic. And you and I could tell stories for 3 days or 3 months about how many times you and I see this over and over again. But the point is, find somebody you trust. And I would say also the Field Notes podcast is deliberately a vetted space, meaning my goal is for people who listen to this podcast always, always, always to end the visit with a trustworthy person or teams they can go to about something they're passionate about, because they've heard it matters, but they need somebody they can go to that I would trust me or my family with. And I would trust me or my family with you based on what you've shared. So
That's
just
awesome.
wanted to stop and flag a couple of those things. Anything you flashed on from that you want to sort of, does that feel accurate to you? And again, I never object to pushback on the podcast. If any of it's a mischaracterization, I'd love to know it.
No, I mean, I feel like, yeah, we could probably not only 3 months on that, we go 3 months on half the things we've talked about. Because that is actually just another example of something that's really important. You know, you'll hear a lot of debate in the space. H. pylori is a huge one. Some people will argue it's commensal. Some people will argue it's bad. I want to know who the person is. So for me, when my practitioner was going through this, one, we saw the virulence factors, which, to not get too complicated, I'm probably not even the person to explain it. It just can indicate a more serious infection or higher risks of certain cancers can result from it. Okay, maybe we do something about it in this kid. But two, I had a history of stomach ulcers that winded me up in the hospital or wound me up in the hospital multiple times because of the pain. And so even Western medicine recognizes that a lot of stomach ulcers can be associated or even caused by an H. pylori infection. So when we see that in someone, that would be a perfect example, kind of synonymous to your parasite example, where for some people, maybe it is commensal. I mean, 50% of Africa has it. I don't know if that proves that it's good, but certainly some people have probably adapted to this or are using it beneficially. Evan Transue wasn't using it beneficially. It's actually hurting me. And thank God we had Western medicine to cover me up from the stomach ulcers that I was getting. Because one time it was pretty bad. I mean, there was like, legitimate suspicion of actual bleeding, and I needed to do back-to-back colonoscopy endoscopies. It was very scary, and it sucked doing either of those, let alone back-to-back days. So that these are the nuances that people don't understand. And I think both of us come across as genuine people because we are. It's like, we're not trying to sell you services. In fact, I don't even usually work with people. I'm the one doing the podcast. My wife works with people. She's an FDN. But like, there's no website I can give you, or I'm going to give anyone for me to work with people. But like, you could run that GI map test. You probably can get that direct to consumer nowadays. And if you just see H. pylori high and then you start going on Dr. Google and trying to figure that out, I would bet more money than not that you're going to do the wrong thing with that result. And that's not a bet I want to be right about, but it is a bet I would take.
Yeah. Just two brief anecdotes on that. One is a circumstance I ran into around this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain regulating how much cortisol is released by the adrenal and how much it is converted to free cortisol diurnally every 24/7. An individual was on big doses of corticosteroids from Mexico based on a sort of online test and treat protocol. And the dose was about tenfold physiologic dosing, meaning this particular pathway is exquisitely sensitive to suppression by taking this stuff. It's just a sort of, dragons be there type place. And so the conversation was, okay, so you've taken this step, but here's the potential consequences. And so this was a self-treatment protocol, inadequately supervised. That kind of thing can happen. And often the adrenals don't come back online. So you and I could share stories for days about that too. But here's the good news. When you work with somebody like Evan, when you work with a reputable group, the degree to which these things we're talking about today beautifully integrate into everything else cannot be overstated. And this has been so important to my practice because I don't have conventional medical providers call me and say, Downey, every single note I generate goes to the person's primary care provider. That's our model. And so there's no black box. So somebody with inflammatory bowel disease, we have a policy that we have to know their primary care provider. The note goes to them. It says ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. It says what the calprotectin was doing. And it says we started a colostrum-like product with spore-based probiotics. We did this to bring down the beta-glucuronidase. We did this to bring back the lactobacillus colony. And I've never received a call from a primary care provider saying, I just saw your note come back and you're tinkering with this volatile bowel problem. And so the reason I think that that's happening is because the gastroenterologist and the primary care doctor can start or stop conventional treatments, etc. The patients are happy. They feel like a root cause analysis is being done. If the work you and I did heavily stepped on or interfered with or was prohibitive to conventional treatment, it'd be a whole different conversation.
Yeah, and I apologize. You did ask how we would work with other the primary care docs or whatever, so I did not answer that. As FDNs, we can't control them once they're out there. I am adamant to make sure that everyone is in agreement. I will say, when you get people like me who don't have the other letters, right? And even people like you, that's what kind of sucks sometimes. You could have the letters and they still don't respect that you went away from the beaten path. It's like, I get doctors that love this and understand I am not going out of scope and that I am just supporting the lifestyle stuff. They're like, hell yeah, thank you that I don't have to do this, because I kind of want to, but I can't do this in the practice that I'm in. I only have 5 to 10 minutes with the client. Some are very grateful for it. Others, aren't. So I'll go as far as they want to go. And the important thing as an FDN that we're taught, obviously, is you don't ever do something that you have not been taught to do or legally allowed or are legally allowed to do, right? So someone's on medications, we're not messing with that. And we have a team of clinical advisors that are kind of our backup, if you will. So, if someone says that the medication that they're on is over the counter Advil, okay, I kind of have a general idea of, what to do and what not to do there. But if someone comes with a laundry list of 20 things that they're on and now wants to work with an FDN, I can actually book in with our clinical advisors just to double check this and say, like, I actually present to them. I say, hey, this is the stuff that I've come up with. These are the supplements I want to use. The last thing, do no harm. We don't want to harm someone. Does this all make sense with the medications that they're on? And those clinical advisors will double check that. And of course, you pick some things up along the way while you go to them, but I still always double check the work, because I just refuse to be, you know how this is. So many clients and people come in, they've been to 10 other people. Some of these people have spent $50,000, $70,000 before they've come to you. They did not come to a 29-year-old without a relevant college degree because they're bored. They did that because they felt that they had no other option, which is actually very sad. And so when these things happen, I refuse to be a person that becomes another one in the list where, oh yeah, this was number 11, another few grand wasted, whatever. I cannot promise 100%. I can promise I will work with you until the point that you no longer want to participate. So that's what we're up against. And I'd love to say it's perfect with the docs and stuff all the time. It's not. And sometimes I would hope if anyone's listening that's a client of anyone out there, you remember this too. Sometimes the most difficult thing for us is my clients they're the rebels. They are the ones that refuse to work with the doctor. Now I say, I don't know that that's a good idea. I think I would at least have one that I could call if I need something. I don't believe in that.
Yeah. Integrity driven. Yeah. That leads me to where I want to close today. Another goal I always have with the podcast is, folks know with my podcast that they can find you. We're going to talk about that as we wrap up, and that they can do this work with you. And so thankfully we don't have to or try to answer all the questions. We have to flag these big areas where people want to look under the hood. And so I want to wrap up by talking about service. And so the thing that really stands out to me is that you're service driven. And this raises another super important thing. You noted it, and I've noted it too. There are people in the functional medicine space. There are people in the conventional medicine space. There are people who would repair your car or sell you a blender. There's two groups of them. There's a group of them that would do it because they're addressing a need. They are heart-driven, service-driven. And there's a group of them that just because of human nature, they drift into being self-serving. But the trouble is when any of these folks who are providing services drift into being self-serving, they're no longer undertaking the personal rigorousness of how inconvenient it is to keep struggling with serving properly.
Yeah.
And so I have actually found it both incredibly beautiful and transformative and hideously inconvenient to be a functional medicine doctor, because the case that changed me was in 2005. I was at an integrative clinic. I mean, this could be a Netflix show episode. I've taken a job at an integrative holistic clinic with an Ayurvedic MD and a naturopathic doctor, both of whom are hugely respected in this community I'm working in Western Montana. I take the job solely based on the criteria that I'm a family medicine MD and I'm receptive to what's happening.
Sure.
And this person who's completely disabled with psoriasis arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, so an autoimmune condition of the skin, but it can deform the joints of the hands and back, literally melt them away. This person's got deformities of the fingers where all the joints are swollen and the fingers have drifted off axis. They've been on their third immunosuppressive drug, getting into so much bone marrow suppression, they're getting recurrent pneumonias. They're about to lose their job. They're circumstantially and clinically depressed. And they say to me, I'm here in this exam room with you because you're the natural guy that's going to fix this, right? And thankfully, I was humble enough and service driven enough to say, oh, actually, I just work here. But there is a brilliant lady I could connect you with, our naturopathic doctor, who's highly regarded. 6 months later, same patient passes me in the hallway. She's bright-eyed. Her posture is more upright. Her skin is rosy. She appears to be at ease. I just chat with her in passing and say, wow, you look really healthy. How are you doing? She said, I'm 50 to 75% better. And I said, what did Dr. Daly, who became my mentor in functional medicine, what did Dr. Daly do? Probiotics, boswellia, bromelain, quercetin, whole food, stress management, and mindfulness. No drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm chatting with Dr. Daly in the break room over lunch, and I say, if I get training from the Institute for Functional Medicine, will I understand what you're doing? I'll never forget this, Evan. She looks at me, she smiled. She said, if you get trained by IFM, you'll do what I do.
Nice.
Okay.
That definitely must have been powerful. I love how you could rattle off you knew the exact recommendations. You're like, yep, it was this and this. I love those moments in life.
Well, it's graven into my, because it completely shattered my conventional medicine presumptions about what does or doesn't work, what is possible in a redemptive and transformative fashion for somebody who's about to fall off the cliff of their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was completely unignorable. And again, it was hideously inconvenient, because then I had to start working my way through all of my assumptions and figure out this and this and this and, as opposed to this or. And I ran into a whole bunch of cases where somebody'd come in and want to be on a botanical anti-inflammatory, and they were about to require surgery for their inflamed bowel. And I would say, great, I can't wait to get you on that whole food plan and stress management, but today you got to see the surgeon. So, hey, we deal with, this is a psychologist who said this, and I'm remiss in not being able to invoke her name, but she said radical acceptance of what is.
Okay, yeah. But that's what we have to promote more, because it's like, I think people are getting hurt the opposite way. I don't think it's super common, but it does happen. And it's like, the ideal of all of this would be preventative medicine, but none of us, certainly not me, we're not smart enough to do this before we start feeling some pain, right? Like, I would still be eating Hershey's. I love Hershey's. I'd eat Reese's peanut butter cups. I would do all that all the time if it wasn't for these health issues. So I do believe you could probably prevent a lot of these issues, as I'm sure you do, if people really started from day one. The thing is, we're not going to start from day one. Most of us have to learn somewhat of the hard way. And I just pray that people learn sooner rather than later. I've had friends that, in their 20s now, they got like a few pimples, and that was enough for them to get into holistic health because they just want perfect skin. I'm like, good, great time to start. And then others, it's like me, you needed 7 different conditions to really start opening your mind. And then unfortunately, I've seen the extreme the other way. I've seen certain people, they took the diagnosis, they're smart as can be, in my own family, and took that diagnosis to the grave without ever trying any of these other things, right? So I do think some of the stuff can be avoided for sure, maybe even a lot of it, but it starts as a preventative thing. And I do think, I could be wrong, but just based on certain things that have been shared and said recently on main stages in America, I think Americans are fed up, and I think they're pissed. I think we have a spirit of America still of like, We don't like being told what to do. Not all of us, but like we don't like being told what to do. We certainly don't like corruption. And I think people are starting to view what has happened to our water, what has happened to our food, the lack of labeling certain things in our food. They look at that as corruption. I think that's one place where it doesn't really matter your political side. We can all kind of get on board with that. And I think there's a huge movement happening. It sucks that all of us had to suffer so much before it happened, but we might really be getting back to this. And then we might not have to have these podcasts and conversations or anymore, but by the time that happens, that's a pretty damn good day. So
Awesome. Anything else you wanted to share that we didn't get to?
Not really. I love sharing stuff about circadian biology, so I'll more like plant a seed with it. I would highly encourage you guys to start off with a super simple book, just simple in how it's written, even though it's written by a doctor, and then it kind of encourages you to go study other stuff. So it's called Health and Light by Dr. John Ott, and you can find like the free PDF online and just download it to Kindle and read it or something. But this was done decades ago. Dr. John Ott since passed. He passed like 90 years old too, for whatever that's worth. And he was one of the first people that started looking at how light, artificial and natural, affects humans. And there's some very fascinating stuff in there. So it's more to, it's not that it's so scientific study riddled, it's not, but it's very interesting. It's a thought experiment. It's filled with anecdotes. And now there are studies to show you the light side today. So that's normally one of my favorite things to talk about, but I'll spare you the 2 hours of that. And just recommend Health and Light with Dr. John Ott. And then if you guys want anything from this podcast today, resources, we have directory of FDN practitioners. It's just functional diagnosticnutrition.com/podcast.
Yeah, I think what Joe Rignola, who supports me on the East Coast, who I don't stop and give enough props to. I mean, Joe makes this all possible. He did Human Longevity Project way back when, and now, co-hosted the Healing Habits Summit and a documentary on growing our own food. And I'll just ask Joe to put both the links to the book and Functional Diagnostic Nutrition in the show notes, so it's really easy for people to just click on that and go check it out. Thanks a million. This has been a blast. It made my day getting to talk with you, and I really respect what you're doing and all the light you're bringing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.